Hello, and welcome to another collab review video. I'll be going over the surprising Detective Conan and Yaiba collab. I do say surprising because in JP, this collab happened after Haikyuu. Even though Gonho sees Haikyuu on their main news video, we are getting Conan first for some reason. I was more excited for Haikyuu than I was for Conan, and I think that's the general consensus, since Conan was a bit of a dud in JP. This 7 Magic Stone RAM has 27 units, and even though it brings the first unit with an 82% damage reduction later skill, most of the units here are a bit underwhelming. Still, a lot of equips here are very interesting, and I wouldn't outright skip this collab. I would maybe just do one multi and see what you get. If you do a multi, you will also have a chance of getting some of the old Conan units that never made it to an A. These aren't particularly impressive, but at least some of the equips seem to have passable awakenings. These 3 are available via Rainbow Metal Exchange and via MP purchase, but seeing how MP is precious nowadays, I wouldn't spend any of your monster points and only get them via exchange. This unit is only available via Black Metal Exchange, and it's also not that impressive, but you might want to pick it up just in case the equip ever comes in handy. There's also this equip that you can get via exchange or other farmable units. Free is free, so make sure to get it. The reason why MP is so precious nowadays are the collab badge enhancement units. Each of them will cost you 1 million MP, and for Conan and Yaiba, Kaito is the badge enhancement unit. As a unit, this is a somewhat strong rainbow rebuffer, and even has 5.4 effective HP, which is higher than units that reduce damage by 81%. To get this unit's full power and 5.4 effective HP, you will need to match 4 attributes and a T somewhere there while having an all-balanced team. If you want to play this sort of leader, you will have an easier time playing with Conan, who as a BGM is obviously stronger, and is the unit that has more effective HP since he reduces damage by 82%. But if you can't get access to that BGM or don't want to spend resources chasing after Conan, you could always make a team like this and be able to tackle some endgame content. I honestly wouldn't get this unit just for its base. I would get it for its equip. The awakenings alone are very unique, and when I first saw it, my immediate thought was that I needed to get 6 and turn Kaito into his equip. Obviously that's overkill, but I would get at least 1. A 10C, Dungeon Boost, and Paprika Awakenings are really nothing to scoff at, and if you're playing Themis or any team that uses Palo, that balance type awakening will also come in really handy. Not only that, but this equip also has a useful haste active skill. Again, I would get at least 1 of this unit just for the equip, but do keep in mind about the other upcoming MP units. These are all very solid, and you might want to set aside some MP to get those. So maybe don't go overboard and get 6 Kaitos, because you might regret it. Okay, now onto the REM units. Yuzo is a looping cap breaker for wood units that also fixes your board. He offers some bulk and utility with his skill boost, team HPs, and crosses, but I don't think there's really a team that would actually want him. If you're playing wood, break, or ice are most definitely in bulk right now, and those are better cap breakers for those teams. In the near future, we'll have Jupiter, and those teams do not need a cap breaker. Yuzo's equip also give utility and some bulk, but it's not often that I find myself wanting to fit in a cross or T awakening via equip. The equip's active skill does change the outer edges to wood orbs, which is not unique if you have Tapio from Gonho Another Story, but maybe for a specific ranking, this type of active skill might be more useful if you also need the cleric effect, though I highly doubt that this will ever be useful. Ran also offers a lot of utility with her skill boost, tape, and possible 2 Paprika Awakenings. They may be able to deal some damage if you match wood elves, but that is a dead playstyle at the moment. Her active skill deals with board shrinks, can give you a shield, give you a wood attack spike, and destroy a shield. All of these could be useful effects, but I wouldn't dedicate a team slot for a unit like this. Her equip will probably be more useful. It could give you a nice recovery boost for super altitude dungeons, and the wood resist and physical killer could both be very helpful in the upcoming Jupiter title, as the boss in that dungeon is physical type and hits really hard. The active skill might not be that attractive, but if you max skill it, then you might be able to overcharge it and use whichever unit you put this on as a cleric. At the very least, the cooldown on that pseudo cleric will be 7 turns, which is on the high side for a cleric. I would mainly just use this equip for its awakenings and forget about the active skill. Miyamoto could have a lot of skill boosts and can also deal damage in light TPA teams, but his active skill is on a really long cooldown and it does way too much. The gravity and the void damage and attribute absorption for 3 turns could be very useful, but on an 8-turn cooldown, it might not come up right when you want it. You're probably better off looking for a unit that deals with those absorptions on a much shorter cooldown, given that delays and gravities might not be worth the higher cooldown. The equip adds a good damage boost to light TPA units, and given how there's a light TPA team from this collab, it might be useful there, but the active skill effects are not all that desirable, and the lack of bulk awakenings on this equip is also not ideal, not to mention that the light TPA team from this collab will not have much lasting power, so you might not have much use for either the base or the equip. Kojiro also could have a lot of skill boosts and could deal some damage in rainbow or rainbow-ish teams. He also has a T awakening, which could work with Conan, seeing how that's his whole shtick. His active skill pierces void shields and deals with attribute absorption shields. Though on a rainbow team, you might already have a way to deal with void damage shields via latents, or if you're using Conan, his active skill already gives you a pierce effect. So on that team, Kojiro at best will only deal with attribute absorption shields, help fix your board, and give himself a cap break. Usually having one unit that only deals with one type of absorption is not ideal, so you'll be better off finding some other unit that also deals with damage absorption shields. Vermouth has a lot of utility and looks like a cleric, but she does not deal with unmatchable debuffs. Though if you have a unit in your team that deals with unmatchables, either via active skill or via the unmatchable latent, this might not be a bad unit to put in your team, since she also gives you a looping shield. Since this is basically your half cleric, you might not be able to pop her active skill every single time it comes up to get the looping shield effect. Her equip does come with 3 team HPs and a tape resist, which all could be very useful, but the Dark Sub attribute and the self-delay active skill might not make it all that attractive. Professor has a 2-turn Orb Generation active skill that synergizes really well with Omnimon. If you didn't get Joe from Digimon, this is another option that you could run instead. He won't be dealing any damage, but can still help you recover assist, and because he's not a transforming unit, you could put any equip of your choice to deal with any dungeon mechanics at the beginning of a dungeon. In addition, since he only generates 5 of each orb on a 5x4 board, you will be able to heal without having the need to fix your board or running a roulette in your team. Again, the biggest downside will be that you won't be able to deal damage in an Omnimon team, as you will not be making any team matches in that type of team. Mr. Spider gives you a fixed board, but I failed to see where this could be all that useful, as all of the orbs are scattered around the board. On a 6x5 board, you could match 2 BDPs in a row, but this is a bit time consuming, and I'm sure there's other units out there that can give you easier boards for ranking dungeons. If you do get this unit, I would still keep them around just in case it's ever useful, and also because the equip isn't too bad if you need the Levitate equip and want those OE colors. Garota is also very weak as a unit, since his active skill has very niche applications. He could add some bulk, but to deal damage, you will have to match these, which is not a popular playstyle. Conan does use these, but he doesn't have a need for Garota's roulette, and you could find better units to deal with time debuffs and board shrinks. Though his equip could be very useful. It has 2 full resists, a team HP, and some OEs, plus the active skill could be handy in some dungeons. Both Kazuha and Kazami are looping shields, though in the case of Kazami, he only loops with 3 other haste units. This collab does bring some support for Rainbow Haste teams, but these didn't really catch on, so Kazami might not have a home. At the very least, his equip gives 6 effective skill boosts, plus it also offers some utility, bulk, and damage. Kazuha is a bit more interesting. She can deal a good amount of damage in a light TPA team, and she also offers a lot of utility with her resist and hard L. This unit is the first 40% damage reduction unit that doesn't have an Evo active skill or is a transforming unit, though this 7-turn cooldown is a bit on the long side, and if interrupted, you might be left without a shield for a long time. Her active skill also deals with time, recovery, and attack debuffs. So Kazuha could be a really good sub, especially if you know the optimal times to use her active skill. Her equip is also useful in SN6 or balanced teams, as it gives you 5 effective skill boosts, some bulk, and some utility with the jammer resist and heal OE. Jin and Vodka are both damage stealers that can really shine in Moon dungeons, though dark combo teams will be soon dominated by Haikyuu units, so these might not stand out for that long. Still, since Jin has a haste active skill, he could fit in a Karasuno team. though the Pierce effect is not ideal since Hinata, who is a leader of those teams, already deals with damage void shields. Hinata also deals with orb generation, so Vodka might not be all that useful in those teams either. But there are some teams out there that use both of these units in very specific farming teams. Also, Jin could possibly be useful in Rosetta teams, since those sometimes do run a dedicated piercer. Miwako and Takagi both have active skills that could loop if you include another copy in your team, or you could only loop one if you include 4 haste units in a team. If you do either of those things, Miwako can give you a looping shield and void attribute absorption effects, and delay the enemy by 1 turn if possible. Takagi will give you an HP buff and deal with damage absorption shields, and he can also, if possible, delay the enemy. It is a lot of trouble to go through to loop these effects, so honestly it might not be worth the effort. Both of their equips have really interesting awakenings. Miwako gives you 2 team recoveries, while Takagi gives you 2 team HPs. These equips are very interesting, mainly due to the attribute resist awakening. Sometimes getting enough bulk for some of the endgame content requires you to run attribute resist latents. The 1 slot ones reduce damage by 1%, while the 2 slot ones reduce damage by 2.5%, but the awakenings reduce damage by 7%. So these could provide a lot of flexibility when it comes to latents, if you can fit them in. Either of these could be very useful in the Ult UN Rush title. The Fire Resist could help you against Rimu, and the Light Resist could help you against Aggregate. Takagi's equip is probably more useful in general, especially because Light Resists are also used in some cheese teams. Both of these units are much better cleric options. Both offer utility and can help recover assist. Suzuki is a full cleric since she can deal with binds, and her active skill also gives you a looping roulette. Though the bad side about having a looping effect on a cleric means that sometimes you won't be able to pop their active skill since you'll want to have the cleric effect for some other floor. So if your team desperately needs a looping roulette to work, I would look into other units, or get to know the dungeon like the back of your hand to know when to optimally use Suzuki. As I mentioned, Sayaka also has some utility, but could actually deal damage in a light TPA team. She is not a full cleric since she doesn't deal with regular binds, but most of the time, you don't really care much about that effect since units nowadays have the full bind resist awakening. This cleric can fix board shrinks and deal with enemy shields, so she's really not a bad option if you want an aggressive cleric. Her equip is also really good on most light units and teams due to its light sub-attribute awakening, Tensei, and light takoyakis. Not to mention that team HPs are always good and that the haste effect is also very useful turn 1 of any dungeon. This equip also gives you a +2 combo effect for 99 turns, which could be easily interrupted by enemies, but could allow you to match less combos and still reach Tensei. That is not a bad effect, but some teams might not actually want it since it could slow you down. Amuro is a 4-color haste unit, but unfortunately, even on a haste team, his active skill effects will not loop, which is very unfortunate since this could have served as a decent looping cap breaker. So I'm not entirely sure on where you would even use this unit, because if you don't care about the cap break or if you have another solution, then this unit at best can only deal with damage absorption and attack debuffs, which by itself is not that special. Amuro has a decent leader skill as either balance type or dark units are able to receive his leader skill HP and recovery buffs. But again, my biggest issue with this unit is the fact that their active skill does not loop even in a haste system. His equip can only be used once per dungeon, and I don't really get why, as the effects are not really that broken. Maybe if the cap break lasted more than 3 turns, then maybe I could understand. I guess this is good for certain farming teams with short durations. Subaru is also a haste unit, but pre-transformation, he only gives a delay effect, which might not be too useful depending on the enemies on the first floor of a dungeon. His post-transformation active skill gives you a looping roulette and time buff, and the effect lasts for 7 turns, meaning that you don't need any other haste units to loop the effect. He creates a roulette in the bottom left corner, and this ensures that if an enemy shrinks your board, you will still have access to that roulette. His equip is somewhat interesting due to the bulk, OEs, and power break awakenings. The T awakening is somewhat niche, but could be useful in a Conan team. The active skill effects could be very handy in a farming team due to the 35% gravity attack. Both of these 8-star units are exchangeable with GFEs, and I wouldn't really consider Amuru at all, since its base and equip do not have any immediate uses. Subaru is a bit more interesting since his active skill loops by itself and could also be handy in future haste systems, but I am skeptical that rainbow haste systems will become a thing in the near future. If you're a believer, maybe look into getting him, but honestly at the end of the day, he is also an easy skip. Both of these units can deal with absorptions, though the trio is trickier to use and might not be worth the effort. This unit has an Evo active skill, and each stage deals with some mechanics while giving you 3 cores. Probably the most important effect out of these is the second stage, since this deals with absorptions, but the voiding effect only lasts for 1 turn, and this is not optimal, especially if you need to deal with an enemy that has super assault. This 3-color anti unit is meant to synergize with someone like Conan, but he has better options when it comes to dealing with absorptions or other debuffs, and really doesn't need the pierce effect from this unit's 3rd stage active skill. The equip does offer a lot of utility and might give you a decent damage boost on a Conan team, since those need to match a T shape. This unit is exchangeable, but I feel like this is a really low priority trait, as neither the base or the equip have a lot of promise. And speaking of better options for Conan teams, Kogoro. This is the go-to unit for the attribute and damage absorption voiding role. On transformation, he does self-bind for 5 turns, which is a new mechanic that Gonho is messing around with. This is supposed to be a self-debuff to justify the unit's somewhat low transformation cooldown. I think it's also their intention to remind people about the hard L's commonly forgotten effect. If you match one, you can reduce 1 turn of bind. Post-transformation, this unit offers a lot with his utility and damage awakenings. The active skill lasts for 2 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, which is optimal to deal with enemies with any super assaults. The active skill also gives you a targeted attack buff to your whole team and a small 10% gravity. These 2 effects might not be that important, but could be really handy in some specific dungeons. Kogoro can also be a really decent leader, but his leader skill will require you to have a full wood team, which is pretty restrictive. But again, this unit mainly shines as a Conan sub. Another important aspect of this unit is that he also brings a wood and light teas to the team, which will make it easier to activate Conan's leader skill. Yaiba and Sayaka is an exchangeable 9-star duo unit, meaning that it can take some collab units as fodder, but I wouldn't rush to make this exchange, as the base doesn't seem particularly useful. This is a big stretch, but this unit is a bit like Valentine Noah. Its Evo active skill gives you a board on both stages, gives a 2-turn pierce effect, and 1 stage of their active skill charges other units by 1 turn. The cooldowns are different, but this 7-to-1 haste active skill still loops with 3 of the same units. Obviously, this is a much worse unit since you'll get a random assortment of orbs and the resulting board will not be swipeable. Another big difference is that this duo unit gives itself a 40 billion cap break. Therefore, you don't need to run a dedicated cap breaker like with Pinoa, but this also means that half the time, this 3-unit system won't be doing any meaningful damage. You would think that this unit would be the best piercer option for the Yaiba late TPA team, but that team has a way better option for that role and doesn't really have a need for this duo's board change. Yaiba and Sakaya's equip is probably a lot more useful if you value parts farming, as this is one of only 3 equips with a Levitate and Power Break Awakening. One of the other 2 equips is from JJK, which we unfortunately missed out on, and the other one comes from an MP unit we'll get very soon. These 2 other equips change a unit's sub-attribute, which does limit their possible uses. Therefore, this Yaiba equip might be the best general option for various teams. Equips tend to age better than units and leaders. So if you see value in this equip and have the fodder to spare, maybe look into this trait just for the equip. Be warned, as this can be power crept very soon. It's only a matter of time before we get an equip with Levitate and Power Break Awakenings, plus other useful stuff like a Team HP, a Haste active skill, or both. The unfortunate part is that this unit only takes collab units as fodder, and I wouldn't roll enough in this collab to have enough fodder to make the trade. Yaiba is the 2nd best leader that you could get out of this collab, and he is exchangeable for select collab units and GFEs. This light TPA leader slightly boosts the drop chances of parts and eggs, just like Sakamata, but Yaiba's leader skill also gives a 7x6 board and is a bit more adept at actually farming parts, since this team does not deal mass attacks like Sakamata. Post-transformation, Yaiba has a looping time buff and roulette active skill that will allow you to fish out more light TPAs. Matching more of those will drastically increase the team's damage, since Yaiba's post-transformation leader skill scales with each TPA match. Though this team is a little bit slow, as you'll be playing on a big board and Yaiba's active skill will only give 4 light orbs, leaving you to fish out more light orbs from his roulette to deal any meaningful damage in newer dungeons. You don't have to run this unit as a leader though, because Yaiba can serve well as a sub to just give you a looping roulette and time buff on a very short cooldown. Obviously, you'll be missing out on damage if whichever team you fit him in doesn't reliably match TPAs, but Gonho has released some rainbow TPA units as of late, so maybe this unit could work in teams like those. Yaiba's equip is great for some of his ideal subs, like the Batch unit, since that duo would rather change his sub-attribute to light and would welcome the damage awakening to deal more overall damage. Assembling a decent Yaiba team, while accessible, is overshadowed by other meta leaders. So if you have those, I really don't see much reason why you should exchange or go after this unit. Heiji and Conan is the Batch unit, so they're exchangeable for 14 collab units, or you can buy the bundle for $30. This duo unit synergizes with Yaiba teams, and if you care for Conan teams, you'll also want to get this unit for the Batch. Each of this unit's active skill stage handles an absorption, and due to this, you'll have to be conscious of which absorption voiding effect you'll have available next. So you might have to dump the skill and stall in preparation for a specific floor. The cooldown on the active skill isn't too long, so this is not a big deal. The whole unit overall is a bit reminiscent of Omnimon. Just like with him, you can cycle 3 copies of this duo and deal 180 billion damage across 2 turns. Though unfortunately, Heiji and Conan doesn't have a shield breaking effect in his active skill. This duo does counter other mechanics instead, like RCB debuffs and Purgings. So while this unit isn't strictly worse than Omnimon, it's still a bit crazy how that 6-month-old unit is still at least on par with newer units. There are some Yaiba teams out there that use 2 or 3 copies of this duo, but even though a lot of pieces of that team are exchangeable, I would say my resources, especially if you already have one of the other meta leaders. Heiji and Conan's equip has a great set of awakenings and active skill, but honestly, I would be fine missing it if you have a deep box or have exchanged for some of the last few high rarity exchangeables, such as these. Obviously, this equip is slightly better due to having 2 team HPs, but again, I would try to save up resources, and will most likely pass on this exchange and bundle. Heiji is the orb skill unit, meaning you can purchase him for $20. This unit gives a slight boost to drop rates for parts and eggs, so he can ease the part break awakenings requirements in some teams. Post-transformation, this unit can work as a generic light leader, as long as your team matches more than 4 light orbs, though Heiji is most commonly paired with Yaiba, since this unit is also the best piercer for the team. Their active skill uptime lasts 2 out of 3 turns, and it also gives an HP buff for the same duration. In addition, this active skill also gives Heiji a really nice cap break of 11 billion, along with a targeted attack buff that will ensure, as long as you put a levitated weapon on him, that this unit won't have any issues maxing out on damage. Light teams have access to Sakamata, who works with his own teams and alongside Themis, as another piercer option. That HA unit notably doesn't have a cap breaking buff, but that is not needed if you're running a cap breaker like below in those teams. Therefore, the only place where Heiji shines is in Yaiba teams, which again are expensive to assemble and are not worth the effort if you have any other modern leaders. Maybe this unit will be useful in the future for some other team, but at the moment, being a Yaiba team member is nothing to write home about. His equip is a bit more interesting. It does give a decent damage boost, but the active skill and the rest of the awakenings might not be that useful for most dungeons. I could definitely see this shine in some speedrunning, cheesing, or farming builds. For example, this can be used in the upcoming 1.2 billion XP Gonho Collab Colosseum. A lot of cheese teams for that dungeon take advantage of Dark Resist awakenings and use gravity active skills to deal with every single floor. Though if you care for that dungeon, there are a lot of other different builds that do not use this equip, so don't feel pressured to get this unit. Unless you're after the optimal Yaiba team, I would easily skip this bundle, as Heiji doesn't have that many concrete uses at the moment. Haibara is probably the most interesting unit out of this collab, but as it is often the case, this is a mid-rarity unit, so you can only obtain it via rolling. This cleric is often compared to Aurora from Disney, since both give you a looping effective HP boost of around 1.5x. I gives you a straight up 1.5 raw HP boost, while Aurora gives you a 35% damage reduction shield. Both ways of adding bulk have their ups and downs. An HP boost can allow you to use a different shield unit to help tank huge hits, though boosting your HP means that your team will need to have a significant recovery stat to fully heal every turn. If you ever need to use a bigger shield in a team with Aurora, then you will need to time these skills so that you don't have any downtime without a shield. So it does depend on your preferences, but at the end of the day, I feel like I would prefer Aurora over I, mainly because Gung-Ho is cramming more HP buffing effects into newer active skills. Therefore, I am not seeing much upside in running a looping HP buff unit. But as with everything, it all comes down to preference and the specific team in which you are using these units. I could be a much better option if you can get the most out of her damage awakenings. One big downside about I is the lack of effective skill boosts in her pre-transformation active skill. This will significantly limit your team builds for any modern leaders, as most of these have really high transformation cooldowns. It also doesn't help that I gives you a full board of hazards on transformation. Even though her leader skill requires 2 tedious special matches, this unit enables Binoa teams to clear the Jupiter title that we'll be getting later this month. I've linked the clear down in the description below, along with other teams you can assemble with other units from this collab if you want to check it out. Unfortunately, that Jupiter title team is not a swipe team, as Ai's leader skill requires matching those special shapes, and to accomplish that, you'll have to break up Binoa's fire break every single turn. You can watch the video link below, but here is an example of how you can break up a Binoa board into an L and a T. This won't be that easy if an enemy shrinks your board or spawns multiple roulettes, so I don't have high hopes that Haibara will be a popular Binoa leader. Haibara is probably the most interesting unit in the collab, but even then, I wouldn't say that she's worth the chase, especially so if you already have Aurora. Shinichi Ran is exchangeable for 10 collab units. This duo is a staple in Conan teams, as this is your cleric and team white cap breaker. This unit also gives you a few other buffs and can be looped with 2 copies. The strat for looping them is to have 1 copy on stage 1 and the other one on stage 2. That way, you'll constantly have the RCB, time, cap break, and attack buffs all active. This also means that you'll be using a cleric effect every other turn, which sounds like overkill, but this is very important for leaders like Conan and Haibara, whose leader skill requires you to activate specific awakenings. Here, you can see that Ai's leader skill, damage reduction, is activated in endless corridors. But in this technical dungeon that disables awakenings, that damage reduction does not happen at all. Therefore, an unresolved awoken bind will be deadly in endgame content for leaders that require certain awakening activations. Shinichi and Ran's equip is decent, but by itself probably does not warrant an exchange. If you want to play Conan teams, you will want to get your hands on 2 copies of this unit. Otherwise, your Conan team will severely suffer without all of those buffs and constant cleric effects. On the flip side, if you're not going after Conan at all, this unit is an easy get. Conan is a BGM unit, meaning that you can buy him for $30. Their pre-transformation leader skill gives a small boost to parts and egg drop rates, which, like with Heiji, can ease up the part break awakenings requirement to guarantee that parts drop in some dungeons. But like with Haibara on transformation, Conan will not give anything useful like a haste or a delay. After transforming, Conan becomes the first unit in the game to have an 82% damage reduction leader skill, and this is the equivalent to 5.56 effective HP, which is the highest at the moment in NA. Though this unit's playstyle might not be everyone's cup of tea, as he requires you to match at least 3 attributes and a T-shape to activate his leader skill. But with the time buff from Shinichi and Ran's active skill and 2 Conans in your team, you shouldn't have much trouble meeting those requirements. Conan's active skill should give you enough orbs to match these, but you have to ensure that you include units with other attributes that have T awakenings. Let's say you enter a dungeon with only Conan and Omnimon, and Omnimon doesn't have an assist with a T awakening. If you were to match 3 water orbs, 3 dark orbs, and a light or fire T, then Conan's later skill will not activate at all. So again, in the case that Conan's active skill does not give you 5 water or 5 dark orbs, you should ensure that some of your other units with different attributes have a T awakening so that you can meet Conan's later skill requirements. This is one of the typical Conan teams, and you can match a T in every attribute except fire. Again, you ideally want 2 Conans in a team so that you can ensure an activatable board, be able to pierce, and destroy a shield every single turn. The active skill does force your starting point, which usually is not a big deal, but there is a specific scenario where you could unfortunately die. Let's say an enemy gives you a sticky blind and no skyfall debuffs, and then they refresh your board, with the resulting board either not having enough orbs to match a T or doesn't have enough orbs to match 3 different attributes. In that instance, you would obviously then use Conan's active skill to get a full rainbow board, but once the starting point is fixed, you won't be able to pick up any sticky blind orbs to check their attribute. So if you have a lot of those sticky blinds, you'll pretty much have to guess and pray that you somehow manage to activate Conan's leader skill. There are a few enemies that give you a sticky blind debuff and then refresh your board. So if you, at any time, encounter that with Conan, make sure to match crosses ASAP, because things could get real nasty with the fixed starting point. Conan does make it a bit easier to get parts with his leader skill, but when you actually put that in practice with this team, things can get a little bit tricky since you'll be doing mass attacks to meet Conan's leader skill requirements. You'll pretty much be required to minimize making water Ts, since most of your damage dealers will be Conan and Shinichi Ran. What I've seen some JP players do to get some parts is to match a light T, doing 3 orb matches of other attributes and targeting the parts to minimize damage to the body. But this is very tedious, and if the Conan boards only give you water Ts throughout the fight, all of your hard work might be for naught, as you could end up killing the main body before you manage to get the parts. The chances of this happening are small, but this is all possible. This BGM unit's equip has amazing awakenings, though the active skill might not be all that useful if enemies have status shields. This could be really great on a non-balanced unit in your Themis or Sakamata team. Also, the changing enemies to fire effect could be very useful in some cheese teams, like in the upcoming 1.2 billion EXP Colosseum, though most of the teams that I've seen mainly focus on cheesing with light or dark resist. Conan teams require a lot of investment, since you'll need 2 of Shinichi Ran, plus ideally a mid-priority unit, Kogoro. Thus, you'll be required to roll a lot in this collab, and might even need to actually purchase Conan, as the chances of getting BGMs are always very low at 1%. Conan is a very strong leader with a lot of bulk, but this only comes from damage reduction. Thus, any modern dungeons with unavoidable undead animations will most likely kill this pairing. Go-Ho may release a better asymmetrical pairing in the future, but as we all know by now, Conan will probably be severely power crept by then. One option at the moment is to run a Shinichi Ran as leader, since this unit gives you a raw HP boost. Using that unit will cost you some overall bulk and damage, but the HP boost can enable Conan teams to tackle that undead gimmick. Even though Rainbow or Rainbow-ish teams usually have a hard time dealing with thorns and super altitude dungeons, with both Conan's leader skill recovery buff and Shinichi Ran's RCB boost from their active skill, those 2 annoying gimmicks will barely be an issue. The big issue though is that the team requires a lot of resources. Even if you cut off a lot of randomness by spending $30 on Conan himself, you'll still have to roll at least 20 times in the worst case scenario to be able to get 2 Shinichi Rans. Most of the units in the REM do have their uses, but these aren't all that interesting, though Haibara is an exception. Since she's a mid-priority unit, chasing her could cost you a pretty penny. She has the same pull rate as Polo from AJ, and I recall seeing multiple horror stories about people chasing that unit and ending up empty-handed even after a couple hundreds of stones. Like I mentioned on her section, I can enable a B-Noah team to clear the upcoming Jupiter title. So if that's something you want to tackle in the future, then maybe she'll be worth the chase for you. In general, I do feel like Aurora is a much better option as a cleric, so if you have her, I wouldn't feel that much pressure about chasing Ai. Yes, both units have very significant differences, but I have some clear issues, and most of the time, I would rather go with a utility cleric instead of a damage-oriented one like I. Yaiba and all of the other units that make up his teams aren't really worth the investment. This leader recently fell off some of the JP tier lists, and even though you shouldn't treat them as gospel, this suggests that the team won't be getting much support in the near future or will struggle to keep up with the rest of the meta. Yaiba is still well equipped at clearing endgame content, but a big complaint that I've seen about his teams is that the gameplay is really slow, as you'll be relying on a roulette to fish out your light TPAs at least half the time. If you want to go for the more optimized Yaiba teams, then you'll need 2 or 3 copies of the patch unit, which is a lot pricier stone-wise than getting to Shinichi and Rans for Conan, and on top of that, you'll either want to have your own Yaiba and Heiji, which will also cost you stones, some fodder, or even $20. And all of this is a lot of investment for a team that will quickly fall out of fashion. The orbs in Heiji does have an interesting equip, but as a base, he mainly only sees use as a Yaiba pairing, and he is therefore not worth the $20 in my eyes. Heiji and Conan is the batch, and this duo is also on the same boat, but this is at the very least exchangeable. If you manage to amass enough fodder, then the batch unit would be my first trade option, since at least this duo's equip could be very useful in many teams. If you get lucky enough and get a Conan, then things change a little bit. And then my first option would be Shinichi and Ran, since those are very important units for the optimal Conan team. Unfortunately, if you're going for the best of the best Conan teams, you will most likely also want to get the batch unit to run the actual batch in your Conan team. If you manage to get lucky and get a Conan and 2 Shinichi and Rans, then I could see an argument being made for buying the batch bundle, because that way you could avoid rolling the REM as much as possible. There is a total of 7 exchangeable collab units. The 9 stars all take most collab units as fodder, while the 8 stars only take some collab units and select 7-star GFEs. Even though I and a lot of people always advise to keep at least 1 copy of each unit, in this section, I'll be sharing which units I think you might be able to let go. Every collab and seasonal has multiple exchanges available, and if you're short on stones, then surely, at some point, you have traded away all of your copies of 1 unit. I am guilty of that, but I barely felt any remorse, as a lot of collab units are straight up garbage and only take up space in your monster box. Someone suggested this on Reddit, and I'm inclined to agree that this section might be helpful for some, but do not proceed with this if you have an underdeveloped box or are just in principle not comfortable doing this. Honestly, this collab doesn't really have anyone that I would nuke something for, but I'll be doing this segment for future collabs, so I might as well do it for Conan too. Out of the 6 stars, I think Juzo is an easy choice. If you're playing any decent wood team, you're most likely running Frake or Ice as your cap breaker, so this guy is not that useful. Suzuki is an usable cleric, but again, if you have a developed box, you most likely have better options than this. I do like Garuda's equip, but I think those equips could be easily covered by all of the other units or equips in your team. Another suggestion for the review videos was to summarize at the end all of the units or equips that I see being useful for ranking dungeons. I usually do mention that while discussing the unit, but I have never summarized that at the end of the video. So that's another thing I'll be doing going forward. This collab only really had Mr. Spider, but I am not too certain that his fixed board will be useful for a ranking anytime soon. So Mr. Spider is another unit you could purge, especially if you don't care for rankings. Out of the 7 stars, I think Miyamoto and Kojiro are easy choices. I'm not a fan of Miyamoto's long cooldown, and Kojiro's active skill doesn't seem all that useful for rainbow teams. I doubt that Rainbow Haze teams will catch on anytime soon, so I do think that Kazami is another purge candidate, especially if you have Muscati, who also gives you a looping roulette. Professor is an easy choice if you have the optimal optimum team with Joe. Even though Kazuha is very unique at the moment, her active skill cooldown can be an issue in some dungeons that cleanse your buffs. I would especially purge this unit if you already have someone like New Year Izanami and Izanagi. Out of the higher rarity units, in a pinch, I would maybe say that Amuro and Ayumi, Genta, and Mitsuhiko are also candidates for purging. I am not a fan of the fact that Amuro's cap break does not loop in a haze team, and I don't really see much promise for his equip. As for the trio, their active skill is too gimmicky for my liking, and it only lasting for 1 turn is not ideal a lot of times, so I do doubt that they'll be useful anytime soon. But I'll warn you again, try not to completely get rid of all copies of a unit. You really never know if something will be very useful for some specific dungeon. But in this age of various high rarity trades, some sacrifices will be needed to complete your teams. And from this collab, I might only purge people for Shinichi and Ran to complete your Conan team. Heiji and Conan and Yaiba and Sayaka do have decent equips, but I wouldn't roll for fodder just to get these units. Like I said earlier in the video, I do think that one multi in this collab can give you some interesting units, but seeing how some of the future events will require a lot of magic stones, I would rather save up and not spend too much in Conan and Yaiba. Hopefully Gung-Ho doesn't further delay Haikyuu and that collab happens soon after this event is over. If you want to go for the Karasuno team, then you will need a lot of stones to fully assemble the team. Soon after, we'll probably see Star Twine Fairies. This in-house REM introduces Rosetta, which is a really strong dark combo leader. She is a batch unit, but the trade fodder necessary to exchange for her is very limited, and if you've never rolled in past Star Twine Fairy events, then you will need to roll a lot in that 5-stone REM that also has seasonals to get enough fodder to exchange for at least 2 Rosettas. After that event, we will see the Gung-Ho collab yet again. This one isn't particularly that exciting, but the lineup for the second REM drastically changed and has a bunch of new units. Then, Path Cafe will finally debut, and this REM has 2 really strong leaders, which will require a lot of rolling. Also at some point, we'll get a select Super Gadfest that has a lot of interesting units like Valentine Noah, Halloween Kiori, and Tulia. So we have a packed schedule ahead of us, and you should really decide which event you want to prioritize. My plan for my main account is to go after Rosetta, and even though most of her teams don't use any Haikyuu units, Hinata and Kageyama's equips are really strong and amazing for dark teams, so I'll be trying my luck and will also have to spend a lot of stones in the Haikyuu collab so that I can assemble a really strong Rosetta team. I also want to roll in that select Super Gadfest, but I'm not sure if I'll have that many stones to spare. So with all of these upcoming events in mind, Conan and Yaiba is not a high priority. I did do one multi and didn't get too lucky, but I have to save my stones, and therefore I am not going back into the REM since it's very unlikely that I'll get a full Conan or Yaiba team without going broke. Let me know your plans in the comments below. Alright, that does it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and a special thanks go out to Ages Number 1, and Awkward Panda, B, Breastfeeding Obama, Dark Silencers, Doom Raccoon, Dr. Wilco, Eri Ryan, Eri Davin, Hello Derpy, and Lynx for supporting the channel. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.